Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. Progressive Christianity is an ill-defined movement within Christianity that emphasizes social justice, tolerance, and inclusion. It is a more liberal or progressive interpretation of Christian history, scripture, than perhaps a traditional or conservative Christianity. While I've hinted about my frustrations towards progressive Christianity before, as well as what I admire and like about progressive Christians, I want to take a full episode to go over the issues that come up when trying to make an old religion progressive. The identity of progressive connotes favoring or advocating progress, change, or reform. But as my philosophy professor once said, you should always ask a progressive, what are they progressing toward? And this question will be circled back to often in today's show, but anecdotally, it seems that many who identify with the term don't really have a good answer, because often the identity of progressive is more about what you progress from rather than toward. In the context of Christianity, progress implies a departure from traditional religious practices and teachings. Christianity, as big as I can make its umbrella, still seems unbreakably linked to Jesus' identity as God. Now, I think those who think Jesus was more messianic in a human sense can slip just under the edge of that umbrella, but it's a close call. Christianity would not exist today if at the beginning there wasn't a strong commitment to the idea of Jesus' divinity. Certainly there is room for many different kinds of details about what Jesus' divinity meant exactly, but the preciseness is a little bit irrelevant for this particular discussion because it seems to be a Christian, you must believe in the one they called Christ. So when you think about progressive ideology, a concept like social justice might be front of mind. Social justice means justice concerning the need for fair distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. So progressive Christians see social justice as a key part of their religious teaching, and they promote policies that imply equality and justice for all. To be clear, Jesus is written in such a way as to convey social justice at least in the sense of certain kinds of equality. The evolution of his legend undoubtedly favors the oppressed, as do social justice advocates. But to believe that was Jesus' purpose is a theological and historical stretch. It is the most convenient interpretation of Jesus, one that I relied on heavily when I was a progressively minded, aspiring pastor. I longed for Jesus to be seen as the embodiment of love, fairness, and fighting for the oppressed. But by all accounts, he was a Jewish man who claimed to be Messiah. Not necessarily God, but certainly Messiah. And because of that, we are left to understand his message as culturally specific. So shoehorning his radical anti-establishment teachings of the time into a convenient narrative for today is already a little suspect, even if the intentions and end goal sound pure. And perhaps that can be accounted for by theologizing the idea that the Bible is a living document meant to be interpreted in light of contemporary issues. But when things get hazy between applying and deciphering, there's just lots of opportunity for manipulation. Let's take a word that has lost its buzziness. Tolerance. The ability to accept and respect beliefs, opinions, and lifestyles of others, even if they differ from one's own. That sentiment behind the word is invaluable to a healthy society, but As many have pointed out, there lies a paradox within the concept, namely, can you tolerate intolerance? Progressive Christianity stresses tolerance of most ideologies, but runs into some issues when propagators of intolerance share their religion. Being progressive means being active, but so much of religion in general, and especially any kind of perspective on what the Bible teaches, requires a level of passivity. So much of the New Testament is about waiting for God to come back and not fighting, even surrendering to the point of death. That level of passivism is not harmonious with radical right-wing Christian nationalism for sure, but it also doesn't quite jive with progressive activism either. Truly, the most redeeming, admirable, and coherent part of progressive Christianity is the desire to be inclusive, making people feel welcome and valued regardless of their background, identity, or beliefs. Promoting inclusion as a key value and seeking to create an affirming community for all people, including marginalized and oppressed groups, sounds like the kind of Jesus I would love. But Christianity does demand some exclusivity, if any of the early churches are to be taken as credible. Progressive Christians tend to be more liberal than leftist. They favor individual freedom, equality, and social good over anarchy, equity, and overthrowing the government. And more power to them. Progressive Christianity is often associated with liberal values such as acceptance of LGBTQ plus rights, environmentalism, and social justice issues. But I think that has more to do with their words than actions. I don't want to disparage those Christians who have fought in meaningful ways for progression toward a healthier planet and species. But my suspicion is that stance is despite their Christianity, not because of it. This arises partially from the problem of progress harmonizing with a multi-thousand-year-old collection of Jewish folklore, parable, letters from Paul, and gospel accounts. The Bible does not support progressive or, in my opinion, conservative Christianity, but both seem determined to argue that the Bible does. They do it in slightly different ways. Fundamentalists, most evangelicals, and mainline Protestants all call the Bible authoritative. Think about the idea of authority: the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. In traditional Christian belief, the Bible is seen as the authoritative source of religious doctrine and guidance. But progressive Christians might admit to an error here or there in the Bible, or a cultural irrelevance of a certain passage, or humanize the text and deny certain spiritual components. But when they do that, I'm confused why they don't throw the whole thing out. I mean, picking and choosing when it comes to what you accept and reject about religion doesn't bring me comfort, because that's what Christian nationalists do. And to be obnoxiously clear, please, if you're gonna be Christian, be a progressive one. Don't be a fascist. Please. Yes, be progressive. But understand that you share a guidebook with fascists. And they take their shit seriously, and you don't appear to. That's a weird spot for you to be in. That sacred text of Christianity, it consists of the Old and New Testaments. The passages span so many centuries of translations, of edits, and just tomfoolery. Progressive Christians may reject the literal interpretation of the Bible, but they are almost forced to see it as a valuable source of moral and spiritual guidance. And I'm not sure it is one. The moral and spiritual guidance it may provide is likely more related to who is reading it rather than who wrote it. And some progressives might even call the Bible a product of its time. But simply calling the Bible a product of its time and wishy-washy explanations that its teachings and values may not be applicable to modern society seems more placating in service to the value of inclusion. So let me stop bearing the lead. I'm pretty sure most progressive Christians are more so Christian progressives. Their values are more important to them than the tenets of the faith they claim, which is fine. But where this causes problems for me is that their values might be so ill thought out that they need to appeal to the authority of Christianity in service to their goal. And if that be the case, their values are less what they preach and more how they preach, which ultimately is authoritarian. Sound dramatic? Yes. Do I think we should be speaking out against these progressives as much as the white evangelical nationalist cultist bullshit? No. No, it's not my top priority. But just because I hate the KKK doesn't mean I don't critique classist Democrats when they rule like tyrants, because both are bad, even if one is worse. Orthodox Christian belief almost always involved some version of the belief in original sin, the need for salvation, and the promise of eternal life. Lots of disagreements there, but they were kind of the basic tenets. And without those pieces, your Christianity starts to look unorthodox. And fine, I like being unorthodox. Christian universalism is kind of cool. Less Calvinistic Christianity is usually healthier. And maybe a Christian could think that the idea of sin died with Christ. But those fringes are fringe for a reason. It's a weird way to deal with the Christian Bible, Christian history, and Christian identity. And I've never had a progressive Christian speak eloquently on the idea of sin, because sin is the act of violating divine law or moral principles, and traditional Christian belief holds that all humans are born with original sin, and that salvation is necessary to overcome the sin. And if you reject that tenet of sin, what is your take on the spiritual significance of Christ? Usually a progressive Christian will start meandering through social justice speak or accidentally endorsing martyrdom ideals in response to this question. But before they can finish, I find it worth interrupting. Why Jesus over MLK? Why Jesus over Polycarp? What about Jesus' sacrifice was spiritually more significant than anyone else's wrongful death? Because if there's no sin, there is no salvation. Because those words mean things. I'm all for evolving definitions. Hell, I'm even okay with making up definitions. But the literal bloodshed to interpret those words and concepts seems to mean nothing to a progressive Christian. They simply want a gospel that sounds nicer than it is. They ignore all the sacrifices of animals, the symbols in the gospel writers' accounts of the crucifixion. All this damn religion building took a lot of work over many centuries. You can't just undo it to sound a bit nicer. The idea of salvation, which always has been disputed among different Christian sects, still has a fundamental property. It is the act of being saved from sin or its consequences. Christian belief has traditionally required faith in Jesus Christ and acceptance of his sacrifice on the cross to have spiritual significance at bare minimum. When you take away these parts of the gospel narrative, you take away the authoritative meta-narrative of what makes the religion of Christianity powerful. And progressive Christians sometimes shrug off the afterlife, and so do I. So do I. I remember, in many ways, I would not have labeled myself as such at the time, but I was rather progressive in my values as a Christian. But I often had to force it. It's simply a difficult harmony with honest readings of Scripture, even in its context. Perhaps progressive Christians can avoid this essential critique in my argument. Perhaps they've done the work to problematize every section that has been traditionally understood one way and have found the right angle, historical or contextual, to make it all make sense. But I'm really suspicious. Progressive Christians often focus on social justice issues to the exclusion of other Christian teachings. And this leads to a shallow, undereducated, and incomplete understanding of Christian dogma. And while I'm ecstatic that they're more focused on issues such as poverty and inequality, they neglect other essential doctrines of the Great Commission or atoning for one's sins. I mean, what's their answer to those teachings? And lacking clear principles of how they view the Bible is one step of many in their dilution of traditional Christian teachings. Primarily, the rejection of biblical authority leads to relativism, where each person's opinion is considered valid, and that leads to a lack of objective truth. And fine, I'm all for relativism, but Christianity, by definition, is opposed to relativism because it claims one man had divinity in a way that no other man has. You can get as much in the weeds of nuance as you want. There's no getting around the superiority of Jesus. If you don't believe Jesus was superior, you don't believe in Christianity, because that's what the word means. If the focus on social justice is a political ideology rather than a spiritual one, I'm all for it. We're on the same team. But we might not be on the same team if you think such human needs need to be framed with spiritual language. It needn't be. And I'm left to wonder how many progressive Christians are simply afraid of the identity crisis that comes with leaving the faith. Religious identity is your primary identity in most cases, so shifting is a traumatic journey. But the identity gets just as lost when Christian beliefs are simply rewritten repeatedly in a reactive way. Progressive Christians rarely maintain a clear separation between church, secular culture, and state, often blending them in ways that are not only confusing, but damaging. Focusing so much on societal inequalities that ideas of personal responsibility and accountability are regulated to vague standards. They lack a consistent moral compass, which leads to both logical and ethical confusion when using terms like Christianity. Their cherry-picking approach to both culture and creed lacks intellectual consistency. And let me pause from digging into these progressives. And let me share an allegory in the style of Pilgrim's Progress. Chris had grown up in a deeply religious family, but as he got older, he began to question his faith. He was no longer sure that the Bible was the ultimate source of truth, and he wanted to explore other ways of thinking about the world. As he journeyed through the wilderness, he met fundamentalist Fred. Fred was convinced that the Bible was the inerrant word of God, and that there was only one way to interpret its teachings. He warned Chris that he was straying from the true path, and his doubts would lead him to eternal damnation. Chris listened patiently to Fred, but was unconvinced. He found Fred both intimidating and limiting, and he knew that he could never subscribe to such a narrow worldview. Further along the road, Chris met progressive Christian Paula. Paula was warm and welcoming, and she told Chris that she believed in a more inclusive, loving version of Christianity. She told him that God was present in all things, and that it was possible to find spiritual meaning outside of organized religion. Chris was intrigued by Paula's ideas and grateful for her kindness, but he still couldn't shake off his doubts about Christianity. He felt like he was looking for something more profound than the beliefs of any one religion. Finally, after many weeks of travel, Chris met atheist Alan. Alan was a philosopher who believed that truth could be discovered through reason and empirical observation. He argued that there was no evidence for the existence of God, and that the universe could be understood through the scientific method. And Chris was fascinated by Alan's ideas, but he couldn't shake off the sense that there was something missing in his own life. He realized that he valued the sense of community and the sense of purpose that religion provided. But he also knew he could never go back to the certainty and dogmatism of his childhood faith. Chris concluded that he didn't need to subscribe to any one ideology or belief system. Instead, he embraced the complexity and mystery of the world and sought to live a life guided by his own conscience. He learned that it was possible to find truth and meaning outside of religion, but also that it was possible to draw inspiration and strength from religious traditions. In the end, Chris found a new way of thinking about the world that allowed him to live a life of fulfillment and purpose, free from any label. The reason I tell this allegory is I think it's important to distinguish the characters of Chris and Paula. You can find parts of religion, even the dogmatic ones you grew up in, inspirational. You might even find community with those in or out of that sect. I would not call Chris a progressive Christian, and I've created the character, so I'd be shocked if he did. But Paula needs the framework of God or spiritual meaning, and that need for that framework is actually okay with me until she starts preaching to Chris. See, progressive Christians might see their Christianity as a way of life rather than a set of rigid dogmas or rules, but they do have dogmas and rules. The approach to Christianity is appealing to many people who feel that traditional Christianity has been so narrow and exclusionary. The emphasis on social justice and inclusion resonates with those who are committed to building a more just and equitable society. But unlike normal people, like Chris, progressive Christians have a built-in authority in their mind that insulates them from having to justify their values. It's what God wants, or what Jesus would do, becomes a tired refrain. And look, it is necessary for Christianity to evolve, and I'm pro the people who want to do it. But the mere openness to alternative beliefs and values is a lack of commitment to Christian values, and if that commitment to values is wavering, you're going to actually lose the fight for tangible social justice. My problems with progressive Christians is not that they are too progressive. It's that they're too Christian. If equality is the goal, a hierarchical religion can't be the means. I get it, though. I do. I mean, I wanted so badly for Christianity to be more progressive than it is. I mean, I was raised in a traditional and moderately conservative Christian family, and growing up, I was taught that the Bible was literal and infallible, and it was the Word of God, and we should follow its teachings, believing it could answer any question. I attended church multiple times a week, even multiple times on Sunday, and I was involved in youth groups, Bible studies, the whole shebang. And when I pursued the pastor role at Bible college, I began to question some of the teachings I had been brought up with. I started realizing that the world was not as black and white as I had been led to believe, and that there were many shades of gray. I became more aware of social and political issues, and began to see the ways in which traditional Christianity was exclusionary and judgmental. And yeah, at first I felt a little guilty about questioning some of these teachings. Not too long for me, but I was afraid that I was going to stray off the path that God had set for me, and that maybe I was putting my soul in some form of danger. But as I continued to explore my doubts and questions, I did have that moment where I was like, maybe my faith could still be an even more valuable guide to my life if I vulnerably preach my doubts alongside my convictions. My faith became less about the Bible and more about people. And sure, I learned all the different facets and sects of progressive Christianity, which emphasize social justice, inclusion, and tolerance. I began to see that there were many ways of interpreting the Bible, and that my faith didn't have to be limited by the narrow interpretations of my upbringing. But as I began to embrace a more progressive approach to Christianity, I did find myself feeling more connected to the world around me, and I did begin speaking my mind about LGBTQ+ rights and environmental justice. I also began to see the value in other faith traditions and started to explore practices such as meditation and mindfulness. I realized there was so much more to spirituality than I had been taught in my youth, but my trajectory was still one of a cult leader. And transparently, I was not so progressive as to be a member of a progressive church. Those visits would wait till later, and actually, I'm glad they did. As a non-Christian, going to progressive churches, typically to investigate some shady shit, it's a weird experience because it is better than what I grew up in. But it's still something I grew out of. Divorced, broke, and hopeless, staying Christian was my top priority at first. But that changed as I became more honest with myself. As time went on, I began to feel like there was something missing from my spiritual practice. While I appreciated the values, my values, that I had drawn from Christianity, I found myself struggling to connect with the rituals and practices of the church. I felt like there was a disconnect between my intellectual understanding of faith and my emotional connection to it. And despite my efforts to reconcile these feelings, I found that my doubts and questions weren't growing. They were solidifying. I started to feel like I was living a double life, presenting myself as some sort of weird, progressive, or questioning Christian to my friends and family, while secretly feeling very disconnected from my faith. Certainly from the identity. And eventually I realized what shook me to my core. It's that I was in a cult. I mean, this realization was both liberating and terrifying. On the one hand, I was free to explore new spiritual paths and ideas. On the other hand, I felt adrift and uncertain about my future family and friends. How will I escape? Without the structure and community of my church, I felt lost and unsure of where to turn next. I began to explore different spiritual practices, reading lots of books, the Bible included, and attaching to things like mindfulness and pantheism. While these experiences were interesting and informative, they did not provide me with the sense of connection and belonging that I was looking for. In the end, I realized I didn't need a label or a specific belief system to feel fulfilled spiritually. I found that by focusing on the present moment and being open to whatever experiences came my way, I could cultivate a sense of peace and connection that was independent of any religion or belief system. So that's my bias. I know that progressive Christianity wasn't a need for me. And I suspect that it's not a need for anybody, but maybe some people do need it. I mean, that's up to them. But does the world at large need a more progressive Christianity? Or does it need to progress past Christianity? And again, I suppose it depends on what we are heading toward. Let me describe some features of cults. Christian nationalism, fundamentalism, evangelical Christianity, those will all fit these descriptions effortlessly. But every time I say the word cult from now on, picture a progressive denomination, sect, or person and see if that fits these features. Cults, by their very nature, are groups that exercise control over their members, contain thoughts and behaviors to a specific ideology, and recruit others to join them in the good fight. While some cults may present themselves as having enlightened beliefs, they're still fundamentally dangerous organizations. Members are often indoctrinated into a particular set of beliefs and are taught to view the cult as their main source of truth. This can result in a loss of critical thinking skills and a lack of ability to make decisions independently. Cult leaders may use techniques such as isolation, intense rhetoric, and lifestyle homogeny to make the followers more susceptible to their influence. Another issue with cults is their focus on conformity. Members are expected to follow strict rules and regulations, and any deviation from these rules is met with ostracism. This can lead to a loss of individuality and can make it difficult for members to leave the cult, as they fear being cut off from the only community they know. Cults also tend to foster a culture of secrecy. Members are often discouraged from relating to outsiders with opposing viewpoints or questioning the beliefs of the group. This can create a closed-off environment where abuse and other harmful behaviors can go unchecked. Even cults that present themselves as having socially conscious beliefs can still do a lot of damage. In fact, such cults may be particularly insidious as they may attract individuals who are already interested in social justice or progressive causes by co-opting These beliefs, cult leaders can manipulate their members into believing that they are working toward a greater good when they are only serving the interest of the cult leaders themselves. To me, I'm unaware of a Christianity that doesn't participate in at least most of these behaviors. And it's a spectrum, for sure. It's a spectrum. In fact, I know Christians who do not participate in the system of cult followers and cult leaders, but they are also more progressive than they are Christian, whether they admit it or not. But I'm less concerned with individuals who are progressive Christians and more concerned about the groups that progressive Christians might form. One example of a progressive Christian community that may exhibit cult-like characteristics is a group that places a strong emphasis on charismatic leaders. In these groups, a leader is often seen as the sole or one of the only sources of truth and is treated with unquestioning reverence. And sometimes these progressive Christians are discouraged from questioning the leader's teachings or decisions, and any deviation from the group's beliefs or practices will be met with the same type of shaming found in more conservative denominations of Christianity. And because of its foundation, progressive Christians are ripe candidates to engage in emotional manipulation. The currency of shame, guilt, peace, and joy can be exchanged based not on a personal journey, but on the cult leader's goal. Even if the cult leader's goals are well-intentioned, such as social equality, if you must do it one person's way, that's a cult leader. And I'm not trying to overestimate or be overly critical here. There are cult leaders everywhere. The progressive ones aren't my biggest concern at this cultural moment, though that can shift. But believe it or not, Christianity used to be more progressive than Judaism. Isn't that fun? That's certainly not the case, at least in terms of average now. Worrying about progressive ideology is not the anxiety of worrying about what we are progressing from, but it is an anxiety about what we're progressing towards. I mean, anecdotally, a common theme I've seen with like younger progressive Christians online, and in person actually. This is a rather obvious cult habit. They promote an us versus them mentality. They preach that their beliefs are superior to those other Christians and non-believers, and that anyone who questions or disagrees with the group is a threat to their spiritual well-being. And I've seen such progressive Christians encourage those deconstructing just to cut ties with family members or friends who don't share their beliefs or doubts. This sometimes looks like engaging in puritanical book banning and hating and refusing to speak to those who are willing to talk about their political stances in Christianity. And these types, it's a subset, but this subset of progressive Christian, specifically the, social media, younger, hipper, cooler Christian stereotypes. I mean, they're just plain awful. They're awful. They use propaganda and rhetoric to demonize those who are seen as the other. They often still paint atheists as evil or immoral, equivocating fundamentalist Christians with staunch non-believers. This is done, consciously or not, to portray progressive Christianity as the only true source of goodness and light in the world. And this can create a strong sense of identity and belonging, but it can also make it difficult for the in-group to maintain healthy relationships with the out-group. And I'm against cults across the board. Cults aren't defined by their worst symptoms. It's the disease of hierarchical control, toxic containment, and conversion mechanisms. The history of the progressive movement within Christianity is a rather short one. It emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as a response to the social and cultural changes that were taking place in Western society. At this time, many Christians were grappling with the impact of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, which had challenged traditional religious beliefs and practices. The rise of industrialism, urbanization, and secularism also brought about significant changes in social structures and norms, leading many Christians to question how their faith could address these new challenges. One of the earliest figures associated with the progressive Christian movement was Walter Rauschenbusch. We'll go with that. He was a Baptist minister who lived in the 1860s to 1910s. Rauschenbusch was a strong advocate for social justice and believed that Christianity had a responsibility to address issues like poverty, inequality, and racism. And his terminology was the social gospel, which sought to apply Christian teachings to social and political issues. Another important figure in the early history of progressive Christianity was Harry Fosdick. Funny name. He was a Presbyterian minister, AO, who lived in from the 1870s to the 1960s. And Fosdick was a prolific writer and preacher and was known for his commitment to liberal theology and his opposition to fundamentalism. He was a strong advocate for religious tolerance and believed that Christianity should embrace modern scientific and social knowledge. Then you had the 60s and 70s during the civil rights era not just the civil rights era. This was a time of social upheaval marked by civil rights, the feminist movement, and the anti-war movement. And many Christians were inspired by those movements and began to explore how their faith could interact with social and political change. There was also a lot of other things going on with Christianity that were not so positive. But one of the key developments during this period was the emergence of liberation theology, which was a movement that originated in Latin America but soon spread to other parts of the world. Liberation theology emphasized the biblical themes of justice and liberation and called for Christians to actively oppose oppression. And progressive Christianity evolved and adapted and, was very responsive to the changing social and cultural context of those years. And it got more diverse, and it encompassed a wide range of theological perspectives and political orientations. Some progressive Christians embraced postmodern and feminist critiques of traditional theology, while others sought to build bridges, between their religion and secular culture and even other religions. And that's its most refreshing quality, at least up until recently, in my opinion. It was this commitment to dialogue and openness. It used to reject dogmatic and exclusive claims of truth and instead emphasize the importance of listening to and learning from different perspectives. And this openness is what allowed progressive Christianity to continue to evolve and adapt to new challenges while remaining grounded in some form of core values. But those core values, again, were social justice, inclusion, and tolerance, not necessarily Christianity. And that's the issue. Rejecting exclusive claims to truth is great when it's done in the spirit of humility, not authority. And progressive Christians have an automatic problem because their religion deals in exclusive truth claims. Now, perhaps they could say that the truth is not for them to know, but they trust God does know either way. And if I don't trust that God knows, let alone any God exists, what am I to a progressive Christian? Am I an ally, teammate, enemy, project? What am I? Well, hopefully I'm a human, and I think progressive Christians on an individual level are less dehumanizing by far than their brothers in Christ. But they are a group that requires activism and actions, which require organization, which, based on Christian identity, is going to turn cultish rather quickly. Again, I've seen so many progressive Christians demonize atheists or even agnostics who are just vocal in their criticisms of Christianity as a whole, and not just the sects that the progressives don't like. And part of me thinks progressive Christians are severely undereducated or underexposed or blissfully, willfully ignorant regarding people outside of their group. I mean, misconceptions about atheists, let's start there. It abounds in society at large, often fueled by misinformation and stereotypes. Atheists are kind of seen as these amoral, nihilistic, or even dangerous folk, and that's so far from the truth. One of the most pervasive misconceptions about atheists is that they have no moral compass. And this stereotype suggests that, and to be clear, atheism doesn't necessarily have a moral compass, but atheists are people, humans, who often do have moral compasses. Not all humans, but many atheists do. And this stereotype suggests that without a belief in higher power or afterlife, atheists are free to act on their base instincts without any moral restraint, as if they need that authority. However, it's so false. It's not just false, it's deeply insulting to atheists who do take their morality rather seriously. And atheists they're not devoid of morality. In fact, many atheists hold strong ethical beliefs and values that guide their behavior, and they actually adhere to it, usually less hypocritically than Christians do, of all kinds. And they may derive their morality from secular sources like humanism, rationality, or just empathy. And additionally, many atheists are active in charitable and community organizations, and they have a strong commitment to helping others. Another common misconception about atheism is that they're all nihilistic and pessimistic, believing that life is meaningless and devoid of purpose. And this stereotype suggests that without belief in a higher power or afterlife, atheists see no point in living or making positive contributions to society, and that's not accurate. While some atheists may hold nihilistic worldviews, many others find meaning and purpose in life through secular sources such as relationships, personal growth, and helping others. Most atheists hold optimistic views about the future and the potential for human progress. Another stereotype about atheists is that they are angry and militant, constantly seeking to challenge and undermine religious beliefs. And this image of the atheist as combative and confrontational, it's just reinforced by vocal atheist activists like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. I'm not going to include Hitchens because Hitchens was awesome. But yeah, Dawkins and Harris, they can be a bit of holes, sure. While some atheists may be vocal and passionate like them, that's not the stereotype. Or they don't fit that stereotype, because many atheists prefer to live and let live, respecting the beliefs of others while advocating for their own right to live without religion. Like, that's what they want. And furthermore, the image of an angry atheist often ignores the reasons why some atheists may be so fucking angry. Atheists may be critical of religion because of the negative impact of religious institutions on society. Imagine that. They're just being critical of a religion. They should be. Like, most are respectful of the beliefs and practices, believe it or not, even the ones they don't share. And atheists may advocate strongly for separation of church and state, or for the right of individuals to practice their religion without interference. Again, many atheists come from religious backgrounds and maintain positive relationships with family and friends who hold religious beliefs. The last point on this, a final misconception about atheists is that they are immoral and untrustworthy, lacking in integrity and honesty. It's just bullshit. There is no evidence to suggest that atheists are more likely to engage in unethical behavior than religious individuals. In fact, many studies have shown that atheists tend to have higher levels of education and income and are less likely to be involved in criminal activity. Now, there's other things at play there, but atheists often cite the importance of honesty and integrity in their personal and professional lives. Now, for me, I've never resonated with the identity of atheist for myself, but I've noticed they get guff they don't deserve, often because Christians of all political stances, including the progressives, have made them out to be crazy, cold, or contentious. And even if they are contentious, progressive Christians can come off as indifferent to their religion's abuse of so many people, both past and present, when it comes to criticism of Christianity. It's as old as the religion. Don't assume that anyone who criticizes Christianity must be an evil atheist hell-bent on destroying the religion. Many people who critique Christianity are simply trying to encourage the religion to become more compassionate, tolerant, and progressive. But even the progressive Christians are very particular in how they want to be criticized and how they want to criticize others. If they feel lumped into a group of any kind, they get really fussy. And people who criticize Christianity are rarely ignorant of the religion. The truth is, many, if not most, if not all, people who critique Christianity have studied the religion in depth and are knowledgeable about its history, beliefs, and practices. They're usually former Christians themselves who have just shifted perspectives. It's also worth noting that not all criticism of Christianity is hostile or aggressive. I get there sometimes, but in fact, most people who criticize Christianity do so out of a place of love. And I certainly did when I started, at least, and respect, less so that now, of those who are trapped by Christianity. And of course, there are always those who are more combative in their criticism. But that doesn't mean all critics of Christianity are out there to destroy religions. And one misconception that frustrates me is the idea that all critics of Christianity must be atheist. It's just not true. There are plenty of people of different faiths, or no faith at all, who critique Christianity from a variety of perspectives. Assuming that all critics of Christianity are atheist erases the diverse range of voices and perspectives that exist within the realm of religious criticism. Sure, it's worth acknowledging that not all criticism of Christianity is valid or helpful. Just like any other topic, there are those who make uninformed or poorly constructed arguments against Christianity. But this doesn't mean that criticism against Christianity should be dismissed outright. It simply means that we should evaluate each critique on its own merits. Progressive Christians are comfortable confronting non-progressive Christians, but they do not see the log in their own eye sometimes, partially because they are often performing more than expressing vulnerability. Performative progressivism is an issue that can occur in any progressive community, including the secular ones. But it happens among progressive Christians all the time. And can be a tricky subject to navigate because in many ways progressive Christianity is about creating a more inclusive and just world. However, when the community fails to live up to the values in their own behavior, it can create a very toxic dynamic that is harmful to marginalized groups and those who wish to be a part of the cult of Christianity still. In the context of progressive Christianity, performative progressivism can manifest in a few different ways. For example, someone may publicly espouse progressive beliefs about LGBTQ plus rights or racial justice, but fail to actively work towards those causes in their personal lives. This can take the form in failing to use correct pronouns or making insensitive comments, but more commonly and profoundly, it manifests in insidious behaviors like tokenizing marginalized people or capitalizing on their experiences to make oneself look good. Another common manifestation of performative progressivism in the context of progressive Christianity is the tendency to gaslight or dismiss marginalized people who point out problematic behavior. This can create an environment where people who have been harmed by oppressive systems feel like they don't have a safe space to voice their concerns. In turn, this can lead to a lack of trust within the community, and ultimately it erodes the effectiveness of the damn mission they say they're trying to accomplish. It's important to note that performative progressivism isn't limited to individual behaviors. It manifests in the way of communities and institutions and how they function. For example, a church that claims to be inclusive of queer people, but still upholds policies that exclude them from leadership or marriages, or has some clauses about it that other them. That's an example of performative progressivism on the institutional level. But let me take it further. Even if there are gay clergy, it's important to pay attention to how those clergy are treated, and even how those clergy treat others, because cult dynamics don't go away just because the power dynamics aren't stereotypical. Accountability and introspection are talked about more than they're acted upon in progressive churches. Being open to feedback and actively working to address any harmful behaviors or attitudes that one may hold is done out of the performance of being one of the good ones. Even if progressive Christianity is rooted in a desire to create a more just and equitable world, it's important to recognize that the work of progressivism is ongoing and requires constant self-reflection. I'm not sure their doctrine's framework allows for that kind of space. For one, self-reflection always has a buddy in their system, the Almighty. And that alone can poison the well. That's the big problem of progressive Christianity, not the aim, but what they're shooting with. and I think their gun is a cult. These ideologies appeal to individuals who are drawn to the inclusive and social justice-oriented teachings of progressive Christianity, only to ultimately exploit and manipulate the trust and goodwill of those they claim to advocate for. Progressive Christianity presents itself as an alternative to traditional hierarchical religious institutions. Progressive Christians often reject the idea of religious authority figures and promote a more egalitarian approach to spirituality. But a cult leader can use this rejection of hierarchy to present himself as truly equal and democratic. However, he is exercising the same damn hierarchy with insidious control over his followers. In a very cult-like fashion, progressive Christians are co-opting Christian language and concepts. For example, many cults will use language around social justice and inclusion to attract potential recruits outside of progressive Christianity. It happens all the time. However, their actions often contradict the values. For example, progressive Christians might restrict contact with people outside the group or require members to give more possessions or monies to a particular organization. These actions are the antithesis of the values of actual social justice and inclusion. Cults may also exploit the desire for spiritual growth and enlightenment, which is common among progressive Christians. Christians may present themselves as a path to spiritual enlightenment or a shortcut to achieving inner peace. However, their methods are often manipulative and dangerous, involving psychological manipulation, isolation, and sometimes even physical harm with what these churches demand. And it is also worth noting that the individualistic nature of progressive Christianity may make people more susceptible, not stronger against, more susceptible to the tactics of cults. Progressive Christianity emphasizes radically new ideas around spiritual growth and exploration, which can make it difficult for people to recognize when their personal beliefs are being manipulated or exploited by a cult. In other words, taking ownership of your faith that is baseless is rather easy to manipulate. I'll just say, it's your belief. You're in control. But you're parroting my dogma. Progressive pastors are just as likely to use their charisma and influence to control the beliefs and actions of their congregants, even if often under the guise of promoting social justice and progressive values. They use their position of authority to make their congregations feel guilty or ashamed if they do not share the same beliefs. And this leads to the same damn toxic environment as any other Christianity, where questioning or dissent is not allowed. They may also use language that is intentionally vague or difficult to understand, making it difficult for criticism. And progressive Christian pastors create a sense of dependency on themselves among their congregants. They encourage their congregants to rely on them for guidance and support, and they discourage members from seeking help from opposing sources. That power dynamic, man, is so dangerous, where the pastor is in control of the spiritual and emotional well-being of the congregation. But many progressive Christians don't even like the institution of church, right? What about those Christians who don't go to church, so they aren't beholden to a cult leader? Or they don't have one pastor, they have many, and they try to make it more democratic. They aren't doing anything cultish, right? Well, my opinion. Even if a progressive Christian doesn't attend church, there are still ways in which their faith can be cultish. Many progressive Christians are taught to care about social justice, equality, and compassion. While these values are positive, that can be used as a way to guilt people and to feel like they're not doing enough. A progressive Christian who cares about these issues might feel guilty for not doing more to help the less fortunate and to fight for justice. That guilt quickly becomes a form of self-punishment and leads to feelings of inadequacy and worthlessness. And like guilt, a progressive Christian might feel pressure to always do the right thing, to embody their values perfectly. Christian rhetoric lends itself to ideologies of perfectionism, where any mistake or perceived failure is met with self-criticism and self-judgment. This can be especially difficult when one's values conflict with societal norms or personal desires, leading to an inner battle between what one should do and what one shouldn't do, or most accurately, what do the progressive Christians want me to do? Even without attending church or following a specific denomination, progressive Christians might still have lingering fears or anxieties related to their faith, maybe even related to hell. For example, they might worry about that concept of judgment after death or feel afraid of questioning certain beliefs or doctrines. This fear can be paralyzing and lead to a lack of curiosity or exploration, as well as a sense of being trapped. In some communities or social circles, being a progressive Christian can be seen as a badge of honor, a marker of one's authority, and a marker of one's morality. And this can create pressure to conform to any kind of beliefs or values just to be accepted. And that ultimately leads to a lack of diversity and creativity in thought. And it also leads to a fear of speaking out or challenging the status quo. In other words, your ideology is cultish. Remember, progressing toward equality is not the enemy. Cults that control, contain, and convert are. I want Christianity to be more progressive, but I don't want Christianity to be rebranded as progressive. And there's a few reasons why progressive Christianity is not mainstream. One of the primary reasons is that it challenges traditional beliefs and doctrines that have been held by the church for centuries. They're challenging a cult, and good on them. But there's another reason why progressive Christianity is not mainstream, and it's that it's not well defined. Progressive Christians are hated by conservative ones because they are progressive, but conservative Christians often don't even know what they're mad at exactly. But they aren't the only ones who don't get it. I mean, non-Christians tend to view progressive Christianity with a critical eye, as it is still the same Christianity that caused harm and controversy throughout centuries. While the movement emphasizes social justice, inclusion, and tolerance, it is still seen as promoting the same fundamental beliefs and practices as traditional Christianity, whether they do or not. Many non-Christians, especially those who have experienced harm or marginalization at the hands of Christians, view progressive Christianity with skepticism. They rightly question the sincerity of progressive Christian beliefs and see it as an attempt to rebrand a problematic institution rather than to truly attempt any kind of reform. Progressive Christianity rarely goes far enough in challenging systemic issues within Christianity and broader society. Typically, progressive Christians are too focused on performing individual speeches that sound liberal, rather than addressing larger structural issues such as institutionalized racism and sexism within the church. Furthermore, non-Christians criticize progressive Christianity for not doing enough to actively dismantle the harmful Christian beliefs and practices. The movement is too focused on making Christianity more palatable to outsiders, rather than fundamentally changing the religion itself. Any progressive movement within Christianity that I've seen is part of a larger problematic system that has historically caused harm and perpetuated oppression. As someone who observed, lived in, left, and now professionally dissects the world of Christianity, I have to say that I find myself sometimes more frustrated by its progressive sects than the fundamentalist ones. While the emphasis on justice and inclusion and questioning the status quo is often admirable, I have found that many progressive Christians can be just as judgmental and dogmatic as their conservative counterparts. It seems no matter how much they claim to reject the rigidness of traditional Christianity, they still cling to a set of dogmatic beliefs that they believe must be right and true. One of the major issues with progressive Christianity is that it can often be concerned with appearing morally superior more than actually just doing the hard work of creating a more just and equitable society. There's a tendency among many progressive Christians to prioritize performative activism over meaningful action, or to engage in social media campaigns rather than engaging with the people and communities they claim to support, especially if those people don't like progressive Christianity. It's slacktivism that does little to move the needle on issues of social justice. Progressive Christianity often relies too heavily on the language of love and grace without doing the work of actually showing those things to others. There's a tendency to dismiss any form of criticism as hate, to prioritize niceness and politeness over honesty and accountability. And it results in a kind of gaslighting in which people who are pointing out legitimate flaws and shortcomings are dismissed because they're overly negative, unkind, or too dogmatic. At the end of the day, the problem with progressive Christianity is that it's still Christianity. It is still based on a set of dogmatic beliefs that are ultimately unprovable, and it is still rooted in a history of colonialism, violence, and exclusion. While some progressive Christians may reject the more overt forms of these practices, they are still operating within a framework that is fundamentally flawed. Until we are willing to interrogate the very foundation of Christianity itself, we will never be able to fully progress beyond the cult of Christianity. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast or other work I'm doing, go to thecultofchristianity.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, listen, follow, share, and consider subscribing for $5 through Spotify for additional content, or give as much or as little as you can to support this work through links in the show's notes. Every dollar helps further this important discussion as well as start other exciting projects. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.